All right, welcome to the SIG Auth call for Wednesday, February 8th. We have a few things on the agenda, so we'll go ahead and get started. First thing I wanted to mention is that CJ Cullen has agreed to be the representative from SIG Auth to the PM group. So that basically means talking to the PM group and keeping them advised about what we're working on and the status for the features that we're targeting for each release, and kind of making sure that they're aware and we're aware of each other. And so I think that's I think they said maybe 3 PM meetings a release, something like that. And yeah, just being the go-between between those groups. So thank you, CJ, for stepping up to do that. Again, the PM meetings are open. Anyone's welcome to attend those, but this is just to make sure someone is on point to be communicating between those groups. Let's see. So that was all I had for that. The next thing on the agenda, Praveen is on the call. You may have seen some of his emails to the group. He's going to be spearheading a security benchmark. So I wanted to turn it over to Praveen. If you want to share your screen or just talk,
sure.
Give an overview.
Thanks, Jordan.
Yep.
Hey guys, thanks for having me here. So I'm the author for CIS Docker Benchmark and a couple of other benchmarks. And when I was talking to a lot of customers, they found that, yeah, we don't use Docker in isolation, right? We have some kind of orchestration in place. They say, for example, Docker Swarm or Kubernetes. So it would be good to have a security benchmark around that. So this is the idea. So basically, we should have a security benchmark which talks about various Kubernetes configuration that would help the customers to have secure deployments of Kubernetes. So just to give you a brief about CIS benchmarks and what is the project about and what are some typical timelines. So yeah, so the CIS Security Benchmark Program provides well-defined, unbiased, and consensus-based industry best practices to help organizations assess and improve their security. It is recognized as a trusted and independent authority that facilitates the collaboration of public and private industry experts to achieve consensus on practical and actionable solutions. So because of this reputation, these benchmarks are recommended as industry-accepted system hardening standards and are used by organizations in meeting various compliance requirements such as PCI and HIPAA. So basically, each of the benchmark undergoes 2 phases of consensus review. During the first phase, the subject matter experts convene to discuss, create, and test the working drafts of the benchmark. The second phase begins after the benchmark has been published. During this phase, what we do is that we look at the feedback from internet community and try to incorporate the feedback in future versions of the benchmark. So what I'll do right now is that I will share my screen and I'll show you what I've been working on. So I've just developed a skeleton. Hold on. All right, I think it's here. Yeah. You guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I've already sent you the invite, how to join that. So once you join the project, once you sign up here, send me your email IDs and I can get them approved for contributor or author. So once you do that, you could join the CIS community of your choice. So here what we're talking about is CIS Kubernetes Benchmark. So let us just click here. So if you click here, I see that you see that we already have me, Adam, and Jordan who who wish to be author on the benchmark, and others could be contributor or author as well. So here it's like an open source project. So it's open to everyone. You can just join in, and then you can have. Let me just show you this. So basically, you have different sections in the benchmark. Say, for example, API server, scheduler, controller manager, kubelet, proxy, nodes, pods, containers. So these are just the skeleton that I have built so far. And inside each of the sections, you will have various recommendations. So for example, for API server, do not allow privileged containers. So this becomes the title of the benchmark. This becomes the title of the rule, and it automatically gets the section ID. Then you write a brief description about it, rationale why at all we are recommending this check, and then applicable profiles, and how do you do this. So let me show you how it is written, how I wrote it for Docker, so maybe you get an idea of what we are talking about here. So yeah, so basically this is the CIS website where everything happens. So you can raise tickets if you have any issues. So you can come down to tickets and you can add a new ticket right from here. Then you can have some open discussions. You can have some discussions over here. Like you go to discussion and you can have just a discussion like how do you have it on GitHub for a feature or for a recommendation. One cool idea here is that under each of the recommendation section, you have something like add new and propose new. Add new can be done only by authors, where they can add new guidelines and contributors can only provide comments on that. Propose new is a button which is open to everyone in the community. So if somebody feels like that they have a recommendation, you can just go to propose new, and over here they can provide the title, the scoring standard, the description, the rationale, the audit procedure, that how do you audit that setting, the remediation, negative impact, the default value, and the references, and just say add. So once they do that, it goes to the authors and they can review the recommendation and they can already merge it with the benchmark. So it's very much like your GitHub pull request. So it's easy to contribute for anyone, but yeah.
So one question I had is how this usually interacts with just the documentation or walkthroughs or securing guides that the product itself has. So when you were working on the one for Docker, does Docker not have recommendations for securing deployments?
Exactly, Docker doesn't have those recommendations. Yeah, you're right. So usually with the vendors, that let me show you the Docker benchmark. So if you look at the Docker benchmark, they don't have all the security recommendations at one place, and it is not in this format. Like they don't have the audit settings, they don't have the remediation steps. So what this benchmark really provides is, for example, let me open the container runtime. So if you see that under container runtime, we have bunch of recommendations here. For example, let me go to say, for example, do not share host UTS namespace. Now, if you see, Docker documentation don't have this. So they do not have a crystal clear or a very crisp guideline saying that do not share host UTS namespace, and then they don't have rationale there. And the most important thing, they don't have this audit procedure. So in the benchmark, we write recommendation which must have audit procedures, right? That's what provides credibility to the benchmark, that you can not only talk about the settings, but you can actually audit whether that setting is in place or not. So the benchmark provides the audit procedures, and it also provides the remediation procedure, and it has the default value, like by default you're secure, not secure, and then your references. So if you see, each of the item is very much complete, and the vendor documentation doesn't provide that.
Okay, I like the layout, the sort of how methodical it is. I'm as we're just starting looking at this for Kubernetes, I'm wondering why we would not want to have this information also in the Kubernetes securing guide. So
yeah, you should have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure how that was normally managed.
Yeah, so basically what vendors do that they don't have all these security recommendations in one place, so they have like multiple documents, multiple white papers, then you have best practice documents, but they don't have something in this format. But yeah, there are certain vendors. For example, if you look at VMware, it has a Vsphere hardening guide. So Vsphere hardening guide is pretty much in this benchmark format, whether it talks about vulnerability, it talks about the audit procedure, remediation procedure. So it's really up to the vendor documentation. But for example, if you look at the Windows benchmark that CIS has, Microsoft isn't doing a good work there, that it doesn't have all the security settings in one place. The CIS Windows benchmark has approximately 450 recommendations. Would you believe that?
I see. Okay. So yeah, so if people are interested in jumping in with suggestions, I do think part of what we are working on is getting hardening guides set up for Kubernetes, and so I'd want to not duplicate efforts. So if we figure out how to take information from one and fold it into the other, or monitor suggestions to one, I just don't want people to have to duplicate work, and so
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay. So I pasted a link to the original thread that you posted that has the links to this for signing up, and I'll include that in the meeting agenda minutes as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions or before we move on?
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Praveen.
So I'll just stop sharing.
All right. I just had a couple more things on the agenda, and then we can open it up since we have some time. A couple APIs that were in beta since 1.3 are being promoted to V1. These are the APIs that allow delegating authorization and token authentication checks. So the subject access review and the token review APIs. This is what are used by the webhooks to externalize authorization and authentication, and what is also used by the kubelet to delegate authorization and authentication to the API server. Those APIs are going to be one for 1.6, and that will let us promote the features that build on those APIs to stable probably in the 1.7 timeframe. So just wanted to make people aware of that. Because those are not persisted APIs, they're just APIs that are used to query the API server. There's no data migration. We'll leave the V1 beta 1 APIs in place probably indefinitely, since it doesn't really cost us anything. The shape of the API didn't change between V1 beta 1 and V1. So this is more a positioning the things that build on them to be able to be stable. And then the last thing that I had, I'm working on auto reconciliation of the bootstrap roles and role bindings. So when you start up an API server, there's a set of fundamental roles that are needed to allow parts of the API server to make API calls, and some of the controllers and kubelets to make API calls. And so those roles are predefined. You're certainly free to define your own roles that are different if you want, and use those instead. But having a reasonable set of roles out of the box was a requirement for RBAC going to V1. So this is on the roadmap. Now, what happens as soon as you have bootstrap roles? What permissions those roles contain changes over time, right? A new resource gets added, and so the bootstrap role gets updated to include that new resource. And so we need a process for ensuring that the Bootstrap roles have that the minimum required set of permissions. And so what we are doing to ensure that is initially on startup, the API server will look at the Bootstrap roles it expects, look at any Bootstrap roles that are already in etcd, and add any missing permissions to those roles. So it's not going to remove permissions. This lets us stay backwards compatible. If we tighten roles at some point, auto reconciliation will not remove permissions during an upgrade. An admin would need to go do that themselves once all of their HA masters had been upgraded and everything using those old roles had been updated. But this lets us do upgrades without requiring users to do like a manual step, like update one master and then run a migration and then bring up your controllers. It just lets the Bootstrap roles be self-maintained. And so this is a close set of roles. This is basically the roles for the master, the nodes, and the controllers. So user roles that they've defined themselves wouldn't be touched. And there is a way for them to mark a role to exclude it from this if they want to manage it themselves. So there's an opt-out. It'll probably be with an annotation. If you annotate a role and tell us to leave it alone, we will. But by default, we keep the system working. So I'd seen a couple questions in the Slack channel about that. If some of the roles that had showed up in 1.5 would be updated. One specifically, I think, was missing an ingress permission. So the answer is yes, it will be updated when you upgrade to 1.6.
How about bindings, Jordan?
Yeah, so the Bootstrap bindings are actually very minimal. So we bind to the service accounts that the controller loops are running as, and we bind the nodes group to have the node role, and I think the controller manager role, and the super user role gets bound to the API server. And other than that, we have very few default bindings. So
yeah,
yes.
I know we've had to hack around some stuff using like the add-on controller in the GCE and GKE deployments.
Yeah, the goal is to let deployments manage their own bindings, and the Bootstrap ones remain a really small set.
Okay.
The rule of thumb is whoever creates the user and the credential is responsible for giving permission to that user or credential. And so if the kubeup scripts are setting up token files for Bootstrap users or kubelet users or admin users, then the kubeup scripts need to ensure permissions. And so I think I saw Mike adding a binding for the Bootstrapper user that kubeup is setting up. And so
Yep.
it would need to continue to do that or to ensure that existed.
Yeah, we've got that one. And we have to do something about kubelet for old kubelets.
Yeah, so old kubelet, this is what we've talked about, where you're switching from an old policy system like ABAC to RBAC. And so I think what we have to do there, if you want your old users to continue working, you keep your old policy system in place in parallel. And so that looks like running RBAC combined with your old ABAC policy. I don't think we can migrate that automatically because they could have added other policy grants into their ABAC file.
Yeah, I don't think we can do any automatic migration. I was hoping that we could tiptoe the line and have old kubelet identities continue to work while allowing users to do more dynamic stuff with their service account identities.
Old kubelet users working. So the old kubelet users have permissions via the ABAC policy, right?
Right.
So they still would, right?
Right. I was hoping to be able to let you cut off your ABAC policy before you had upgraded all of your nodes. Maybe that's a pipe dream, but
so again, KubeUp can give permission to a user named Kubelet if it wants to. Once you start giving permissions to non-system users, it's really up to the deployment to know, is this a safe username to give permissions to? And so once you get to the edges, like the actual deployment mechanism, whether it's KubeUp or KubeAtom, they're the ones who set up auth and know who the users are, and they know who it's safe to give permissions to. So yeah, that's what I would do.
Yeah.
All right. I didn't have anything else. Got some time. Open the floor if anyone else has something they'd like to talk about. If not, we'll give you half an hour back. All right.
If nobody wants, I would be interested in continuing the discussion I started. I guess David replied about permissions. I'm trying to work out a multi-tenancy scenario, and I just saw David's reply just before the meeting, so I haven't had time to follow his references and understand them. So I could just do that offline, or we could discuss it here.
Yeah, I think maybe doing it in the thread would be better. Since, I think that's likely to have a broader audience. The crux is the implied permissions not being a thing now, and I don't know that. I think there are two views to it. It's not a clear win, whether it makes the system better or worse, or easier to understand or harder to understand.
Fine. I'm happy to follow up in the thread.
Yep.
I agree, that probably is more permanent. I hate getting information by wading through video recordings.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I'll do it that way. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and I'll post the notes again. See the links to the project that Praveen sent, and I'll include links to some of the polls and API promotions that I mentioned.
Yeah, one thing, Jordan, is that if there are any existing security recommendation that you would want me to start with in the benchmark, I can take a look at that.
Okay.
And then probably can get started. But I have added a few skeleton rules, like I have 17 recommendations out there, which I have found from Kubernetes, different documents and references.
Okay. Yeah, collecting existing docs starting points would be a good thing to do.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks everyone. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.